Thank you, Rav Poston. I'd like to thank you first, Yiboneh. Rav Poston is behind the camera, and I just want to thank Yiboneh for helping sponsor this. Yiboneh is a fantastic organization. I encourage you to listen to their wonderful podcasts, especially in these times. There's so many interesting things happening politically, and there are so many ties to what the Torah tells us about today's events, and the rabbi brings in the most fascinating Rebbeim to speak about these topics. So again, I want to give a little plug for Rabbi for your organization, Yiboneh. And we're so blessed to have today Rabbi Breitowitz. I've known Rabbi for a long time from our days in Maryland. Now today he's the Rav Kehilat Or Sameach. Or Sameach is a flagship yeshiva here in Jerusalem, especially for the English-speaking world, and is changing lives all the time. So, Rav, thank you for all you do for our people. I also want to just give a quick plug for our little organization called Jewish Family Forever. Jewish Family Forever, we have a little Facebook page. We invite you to join our group and just see what's going on. And if you want to help take action, we encourage you to do that. Today's shiur is sponsored also by Michael Medina and Medina Catering Group. The Medina Catering Group, if you happen to be in D.C., it's a tough time for a caterer. If you can support them, it'd be great. But we thank you, Michael, for that. And so before I jump in, I just want to mention one more thing. This is the second in a series. So if you have a chance to look at it, if you're encouraged by what this program tells you, maybe you go back and see the first one. The first program that we did with Rabbi Breitowitz was about singles and encouraging them about marriage and all of the issues associated with that. This is more, we're taking the next step now and talking about raising a family and the issues today and strengthening the Jewish family, which I think was what all of us think is so important. So I just want to follow up as a first question, Rabbi. Last time we talked about this exact topic, and I've since talked to a couple of 30-plus-year-olds, and they really enjoyed the lecture and thought it was very meaningful. But they say, hey, we're doing everything we can, and now we're in a Corona time, and so it's makes things even a little more challenging. Do you have any words, any thoughts for them to just kind of give them some encouragement in these times?
Thank you. Thank you, Gary. And again, it's an honor for me to be working with you. Your organization is extremely important. There is nothing as important to the future of the Jewish people as a strong Jewish family. So all of your efforts directed to that end are very much appreciated. I also want to say that we're dedicating today's shiur and today's learning to a little girl, Hadass Shira Bat Elichana, who is undergoing some difficult medical procedures, and may Hashem grant her a refuah shlema and the ability to return home, and together with all of the Cholei Yisrael, and also those who are healthy should also have the bracha of not getting sick in these challenging times. The question of dating or getting engaged or marrying during Corona is a real hard one. I'm not sure I have any particular magical answers. In some ways, we've become habituated to distance learning, right? Shiurim, YouTube, Zoom, and in some ways we have to get into perhaps some form of distance dating. And although it is not the same as person to person, but I think at least a substantial start of a relationship, and more than a start, you can develop a relationship pretty well, and then hopefully, God willing, we'll be back to semi-normal or new normal pretty soon with the advent of the vaccine. I guess the one thing I would say is that one certainly should not have the idea I'm putting all dating on hold until the crisis averts. I think there's so much that you can do, and it would be a waste of an opportunity not to utilize the technology that's there. God put this technology there for a purpose. It spreads Torah, etc., and it can also be a way of people meeting each other, even when they cannot get together face to face. But again, it is difficult. But I can tell you, I know from my own personal experience in Or Sameach that people have met, they've gotten engaged, they've gotten married. So it is absolutely not impossible. You just have to be a little more creative.
Sounds great.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Rabbi. B'ezrat Hashem, we'll see a healing of the situation, and things will move forward in a positive way for our youth. I want to talk about raising families, and I don't want to talk about. I want to ask about parental roles. It's not like it was 100 years ago, and probably in many ways for the good, but women play a strong role in society and in the family. And what is the parental roles? Is the father supposed to be the ultimate decision maker? Is the mother? What does the Torah tell us about this? These are hard questions in these culturally sensitive times. And then I also want to ask about what does the Torah tell us about two parents working and raising a child? Some families feel like they need those two incomes. So just about roles in a family, what you think, what the Torah tells us about those roles, and about the time spent. There's certain times when it's okay to have two parents working or not, and what does the Torah tell us?
Yeah, again, these are difficult questions. Let me start with a verse from the book of Proverbs, the book of Mishlei, a very well-known biblical verse. Shema b'ni musar avicha. Listen, my son, to the musar, to the chastisement of your father. V'al titosh torat imecha, and do not abandon the Torah of your mother. So there is something that is called the musar, the chastisement, or the guidance, or the discipline of the father, and there is something that is called the Torah, or the instruction of the mother. And that implies that father and mother, and again I'm generalizing here, this does not apply in every particular case, are there to give their children kind of distinct aspects of their relationship to God and to the Jewish people. Rabbi Yosef Dov Soloveitchik, Zechron Livracha of Yeshiva University, once explained this in a very beautiful way. He said the father is primarily the intellectual head of the home. He gives the son or the daughter, the child, the halachot, the specific guidance as to what to do, the learning, the analytical, intellectual appreciation of the richness of Torah, which of course will deepen as a child gets older. But the mother provides the initial foundation of an emotional connection to God. And a child who only approaches Judaism intellectually will never be passionately invested, will never really love it, and at some point may even get bored, may wander off to something else. It is really the emotional connection that can be formed at a very young age. Even a child that might be 1.5 or 2, like knows when they see the Kiddush wine, oh, there's going to be some good wine or challah or cake. And Shabbos becomes special to them. And those feelings continue throughout their whole life. Their whole life they'll have that memory. So I know in this day and age it's very hard to stereotype, because there may be men who are more emotional and women who are more intellectual. So I'm not so much interested in demarcating rigid roles, but to simply say that a child needs two types of inputs in their development. They need intellectual stimulation. And this is even true outside of Torah, but I'm focusing primarily on Jewish aspects of life. They need knowledge, data, information, something that's intellectually rich and interesting, that's moshech, a person that pulls a person. But in addition, they need kind of an emotional connection, a connection of joy, excitement, passion. In many cases, each parent might specialize in that particular department. Now, in terms of who's the boss, so to speak, well, the Rambam says it very well. The Rambam says every husband is a king, but only if he treats his wife as a queen. Meaning, the idea that I can come in and demand respect, demand submission, just because I demand it, just because I'm a man, I think is very retrogressive, and it actually is against the Torah. But when there's a relationship of respect, of mutual honor, of listening to each other, then it's okay to have, president and vice president. And I have to say that generally speaking, in the traditional Jewish home, the man was the dominant authority figure. But that's valid and legitimate only if the wife herself is treated with tremendous respect. If you remember, very often a mother has a superior judgment to a father. Number one, because of the intuition that women often have, and number two, because of the fact that she may spend many more hours with a child. When Sarah saw that Yishmael was a negative influence on the home, and she said to Avram, we have to send him away, Avram was unwilling to do so until God told him, everything Sarah, your wife, says, listen to her. She knows what's going on. She knows the story. She knows the dynamic. So in that sense, I can call the man the king of the home, but only if he's a listening person, only if he takes into account everything that his wife says, that it's part of the decision-making process. A man who ignores his wife is not worthy to be a king. And at that point, each person has to make the decisions that are best. Now, I'm going to say something that I may get in trouble for, or you may get in trouble for, because it's not politically correct. And I appreciate that it's not politically correct. But I believe that if you study history, and even if you study psychology and sociology, you will see wants a man that will generally be the one who makes the final decisions. This is what a woman yearns for. A woman yearns for kind of a benign authority figure who can take charge and make those final decisions. If a man is too wishy-washy, if a man does not have a discernible philosophy, if a man simply tells his wife, do whatever you want, that's not necessarily what gives a woman security. And even though, Baruch Hashem, we have women who are phenomenally intelligent, phenomenally accomplished, people who have excelled in all professions, whether it's medicine, law, accounting, academia, Torah learning as well. And by all means, I am absolutely in favor of opening up all of these opportunities to women, because it would be a tremendous loss, not just to women, it would be a tremendous loss to men, to the world, to Klal Yisrael, not to harvest the tremendous reservoir of talent there. So there is nothing that I'm saying that is putting down women at all. I recognize their sublime accomplishments in all areas of life. But I do think that within the context of the home, they want a husband that listens, a husband that responds, a husband that takes their understandings into account. But in very many ways, they want a husband who kind of makes decisions. I know that's an older view, but I think it's actually borne out. So I may expect some negative mail on this, but I said what I believe.
And then just in terms of the roles of, not in terms of roles, but in terms of time spent, we talked a little bit about, two people working versus, is there times in life when that's okay?
Well, listen. In some sense, having two parents working can be potentially detrimental, obviously, because there's less time spent with the kids. If it would be possible for a mother to defer her working till children are in school, and she would work during school hours, or she could have some type of profession that could be practiced at home, so she's available even if she's working, that would be optimal. But reality is reality, and unfortunately diminishing incomes and raising expenses sometimes requires that we have working parents. And also I want to point out too that there's another justification for women having some type of working, because women, as I say, if they have talents and abilities, I think it's important for their psychological well-being to be able to express it. And I wouldn't just say changing diapers or cleaning up a house. So all in all, I think there are pluses, and in fact, in some cases, a woman working outside of the home may make her a better mother, because it energizes her, it gives her more enthusiasm, it gives her an outlet. So in some ways there's a balance. On one hand, not working outside the home creates greater availability, which is a huge, huge plus. On the other hand, maybe having some type of profession, some type of occupation may create greater enthusiasm. I think it depends very much on the particular dynamic. It depends on how old the kids are. It depends on whether the kids are in school or they're at home full time. The one thing is that every decision that both men and women make, men as well, regarding jobs, has to have a sense that the family is the number one priority. And everything, that has to be the fulcrum or the axis upon which everything else is revolving. And then you make the decisions that you have to make. I remember a nice little story. I'll tell you a story about Rav Aaron Lichtenstein, Zichrono Livracha, who was the great Rosh Yeshiva of the Yeshiva Haaretz of Gush Etzion, or Haaretz Zion in Gush Etzion. And he used to live near here. He used to live in Katamon, and he would daven in the Shtiblach. So everyone knows the Katamon Shtiblach, the famous Katamon multiple minyanim. And one time he was learning with his son, like his 10-year-old son, and somebody went over to him and said, "I'm very impressed that a busy Rosh Yeshiva like you makes time to learn with his 10-year-old son." So Rav Lichtenstein said, "What do you mean makes time to learn with my son? My obligation is to learn with my son. I make time to also have a yeshiva." And that's a wonderful perspective.
Right.
Because we, all of us, and again, this is men and women, frankly, we often put our own children on the back burner. You know, we define chesed as what I do outside the home, and I go to this share and that share, and of course all of that is important. You know, all of that is important. But the family, the children are relegated to the bottom of the list. Rav Lichtenstein's perspective is, your children, your family, husband, wife, children, are number one. And then you create a life where you can do other important things as well, but it's against the backdrop of your children. And I can say children, I mean, we're talking about children today, but I also include the marital relationship. Remember, the marital, I think we mentioned last time, that the Torah creates an independent importance to marriage apart from having children. Meaning to say, it's not just my kids that I need to deepen my relationship with, it's also my spouse. And Rabbi Sosalantra says, when the Torah says, love your neighbor as you love yourself, first and foremost, it's referring to your spouse. And then it applies to everybody else
Very nice.
as well. So as I say, you know, it may very well be that working is a necessary evil, but I think there can be some positive benefits too. And as I say, when a person is replenished, refreshed, more enthusiastic, perhaps their time with their children could be a better quality time.
Right.
Assuming they're not too exhausted, so that has to be balanced as well. And I guess want to mention another point, that certainly working moms and working dads have to preserve their energy. So for example, if you're able to afford it, getting help for things like cleaning and laundry is very, very helpful. Because if you have limited time, the time should be spent in a more productive way with positive interactions with your kids, instead of having to do all of the drudgery that maybe you could pay somebody to help you with.
Interesting.
So one should not feel that they're a failure by getting help. It's the other way around. And even things like using plastic dishes instead of having to do dishwashing. Yeah, even on Shabbos. I know some very, very chashuva people, actually even gedolim, who have many, many people for Shabbos, and they use plastic. And even though you could say, well, that's a little bit of a compromise in the honor of Shabbos, but if I'm doing it to be able to be freed up, to learn with my children, sing with my children, do things with my children, I actually think the halacha would say that that's a more important priority.
Very nice. Rabbi, that's. I want to just continue down this path a little bit. One of the challenges, that I hear in the United States, and there's different challenges here in Israel, is to raise children and to get them into the schools you want, the Jewish schools with the right kind of education, that a family desires, to get them to summer camps where they can grow their Yiddishkeit. All of those are important. And so the question is, if you only families only have so much money, so much resources available, where do you put your energy? Do you put your energy in making sure that their foundational school, the kindergarten through or K through 8, is in a Jewish school, or if you have a choice, it's got to be high school, or the gap year in Israel, or camp? And then the other thing is, we have people that are listening that are living here in Israel, and there's a whole different set of challenges from trying to get the right schools here. Any thoughts you have about priorities on schools and how to work that out as a family?
Well, your question reminds me of asking, what's more important, the heart or the brain? It's very, very difficult, because in some sense, you're going to die unless you have both of them.
Right.
And to have to make these choices can literally be a matter of spiritual life and death. For example, even summer camp. Summer camp can be enormously important to give a child a positive feeling towards Judaism. So I don't dismiss it as simply recreation or vacation. But I tell you, if I had to prioritize, if a person literally had to prioritize, I actually think the elementary school years are even more important than the high school years, and certainly post-high school. And the reason I say that is, and I say that with a great deal of regret, because I sincerely hope that a parent will never be forced into making that decision. But during the first, let us say, 8 years of schooling, kindergarten and then grade 1 through 8, a child develops a basic foundation and love for Judaism. Now, it may very well be that they didn't necessarily cover a lot of information, but they've gotten an enthusiasm, they've gotten a background. And once that's the case, then even if circumstances would force them to go to public school, as bad as that is, and it's absolutely no good, at that point, if they're enthusiastic enough, you could do private learning, you could go to local rabbis, even boys in yeshiva might be willing to act as tutors. So there's a lot of supplementary learning that you can do. But if a child doesn't have that background, doesn't have that enthusiasm, then they're just not going to be interested. And the reason I say this is I say this out of my own experience. I attended a coeducational Orthodox day school in Hartford, Connecticut, and most of my classmates were not Shomer Shabbos. We didn't have the stratification that we have today, for good or for bad. I actually think there was something positive in being exposed to a lot of Jews who were not the same.
Right.
Okay, but some people disagree with that. But I can tell you, when I look back at what were the formative experiences in my connection to Yiddishkeit, it's funny. I think much more of my elementary school years than I think about my years in yeshiva afterwards. Now, maybe it's not typical, I'm not sure. But I think about how the Rebbeim and the teachers inspired me. They made learning exciting. They gave me a sense of joy. And that carried through.
But let me ask you, isn't it the case sometimes that when somebody's a teenager, that's when they ask the really difficult questions in life? And if they're in a public school, do they have the resources?
Right. So my point was this: I was not envisioning that if a kid has to go to public school for high school, that's the end of his Jewish education. Okay. That's why I was emphasizing that you've created a foundation where he's interested and excited. You have to augment it. You have to supplement it.
Okay.
And in that supplementation, he should ask the tough questions about how do you know there's a God? How do you know there's a Torah? And in fact, the truth of the matter is, it may be more effective to discuss those questions in a one-to-one than in a classroom setting. So the point is, you want to spend those 8 years of primary school giving him that desire to be Jewish, that excitement to be Jewish, and then at that point you could supplement. You could supplement. Now again, this is a regrettable second choice, but if you had to make a choice, I think this is where I would go. Now, I do want to point out that the cost of Jewish education is a major, major crisis in the United States. It absolutely is. Schools do offer scholarships, but scholarship aid is limited, and it certainly may not cover all of the expenses. There are some proposals that have been around for a few years that the Jewish community ought to adopt a model that is similar to public education. Public education, of course, is funded by the total community. Well, there's a thought, why can't we have Jewish education funded by the total Jewish community? Of course, the Federation does some of this, but literally to do it at a 100% basis, in which you spread the cost of the different day schools and high schools across the entire spectrum of the Jewish community. Now, that's a very fascinating proposal. That, in fact, is the way it was done in Talmudic times. Today, because of the different denominations, Orthodox Reform, it's difficult to kind of figure out how to do it. Is there enough money in the Orthodox community to publicly fund within the Orthodox community day schools? Maybe yes, maybe not. Of course, that probably would mean there would be fewer options of schools. But okay, maybe that's not all bad. Maybe that would require that different types of Jews get under the same roof. So people are concerned. I mean, as I say, the cost of Jewish education is staggering. Now, in Israel, that happens to be one of the things that's not such a major problem. Schooling here is not particularly expensive. So the issue that I think we face, although I did not raise any children in the Israeli schools, is the type of school. Because Baruch Hashem, there is a proliferation of choices. But the philosophies, even within the framework of Torah and mitzvot, the philosophies can be very different, whether it's Dati Liumi, whether it's a government type of school, Mamlachti Dati or Mamlachti Dati Torani, which, again, there are so many divisions here. And at the high school level, you have the Chorev, Marava, different types of schools. And it can be very, very confusing for a parent. I know one parent, one family, that literally sent each of their children to a different, not just a different school, but a different type of school. And in many ways I admired that, because that's exemplary of another famous verse in Proverbs, Chanoch l'nar al pi darko, you must train every child according to their personality and their way. But it is difficult. And particularly, I'll just put in another observation, for North American Olim, the Israeli personality is a bit of a tough personality. so a nice American kid who might be soft-spoken, edel, as we say in Yiddish, and gentle, kind of gets put into an Israeli school, whether it's Haredi or Dati Liumi or anything, any type of Israeli school, and there may be a certain toughness and aggression on the part of the kids that may be very, very difficult for the American child to adjust to. And one of the difficulties here is that teachers don't always take it very seriously. Teachers kind of say, boys will be boys, girls will be girls, so this kid has to toughen up and grow up. You know, maybe that's true to some degree, but that's kind of another problem. So, Baruch Hashem, money is not the issue here for that. Other things, money is relevant for other things, but not for education. But I think the issue of choosing the school, and not just finding a school that has a philosophy that is consistent with your philosophy, but also that emphasizes midot, refinement, derech eretz, bein adam l'chaveiro, that kind of, monitors the recesses and not just the classroom.
Right. Wonderful. So, Rabbi, here, this is a problem even in Israel that I hear is it's sensitive, culturally sensitive, problems. Is sometimes in the schools, even it can happen in like modern Orthodox day schools. You have children being presented with concepts that aren't so well founded in Torah. It could have to do with relationships that are outside of Torah law. It could have to do with the whole idea of evolution without a designer being present behind the design, with all kinds of things like that. So, I mean, how do you pick those things up as a parent? How do you address them as a parent if they're happening in your school? I mean, how do you just deal with that whole topic? Thanks.
Yeah. Well, initially, of course, this will be a major factor in the type of school that you choose.
Right.
If you have a school that openly espouses non-Torah ideas, that's not going to be the school you're going to want to send your child to. But sometimes, thinking about the United States, there may only be one Orthodox day school in the community. It may be very far to the left. It may espouse various ideas that are inconsistent with the Torah. So I think the best you can do is, number one, parents have to realize that just because you send your kid to a school doesn't mean you've abdicated your responsibility as educators. You have to set the tone, you have to establish the values. Granted, as our kids grow older and older, we tend to lose influence, but still, there have to be open channels of communication. You need to be aware of what's being discussed in the school, and you need to be able to discuss it intelligently with your children. If your children come home and talk about evolution, then I think you can discuss whether evolution is compatible with the Torah. Again, this is not our subject today. I think it can be compatible with the Torah, but at least there ought to be a discussion. They need to know that the Torah does have a position on all of these things, and a person can be a faithful Torah-observant Jew and still be scientifically sophisticated at the same time. I think you should get involved in the school, PTA or whatever organization, in terms of getting guest speakers, in terms of hearing different opinions that might be against the mainstream political correctness, and at least the children should be exposed to the more traditional views. So there's a lot that you can do, and that might be preferable than the censorship approach, in which you demand that certain things not be discussed at all, because that may make people defensive, dig in their heels, and you'll be less effectual. But sometimes if you say, let's have a presentation, in the Orthodox world, we have very, very eminent scientists. I mean, there's Gerald Schroeder, Natan Aviezer, who are physicists. There are very great physicians who are experts in medical halacha. And as I say, there's people in all types of realms of science and humanities who are still faithful to Torah, and they can address these issues. And in fact, in many ways, I think it's better to address them than not to address them. In some, for example, let's take in the Haredi world here. The kids are going to go through school. I mean, he'll never hear that there's such a thing as evolution. He'll never hear about age of the earth. He'll never hear about dinosaurs. It's not going to be addressed. No one's going to talk about it. So what's going to happen when the kid is 14, 15, 16, 17? And all of a sudden he encounters all of these ideas that seem to be attacking the Torah. And he never heard about it before. And his reaction is going to be, they were hiding the ball because they had nothing to say. And that could take a person literally off the derech, as we say. So I think it is really from a position of strength to openly confront these issues at the appropriate age, of course, and discuss them rather than sweep them under the rug. Because in this world, the kid is going to hear about it eventually. And if he does not feel that the Torah has a response, and if he does not feel that, or if he feels that we were hiding the ball because we had nothing to say, right, then you're talking about a kid who could very likely simply abandon Yiddishkeit. Right.
Rabbi, I just want to close with one question, just taking us back to people that are just starting families, and I see this, and I've been asked this, this is just maybe what does the Torah have to say about young families? They have 2 or 3 kids, and it's just so physically demanding, and they struggle so much in those early stages. Do you have any advice for them about, we've all gone through this who are older, right, who have had young kids, but just from a Torah perspective, to give a little koach to the young families, I think maybe you have some thoughts for them.
Yeah. Well, raising kids is certainly quite exhausting. I believe there was a story about a famous Olympic athlete, Jim Thorpe, who, as a publicity stunt, decided to follow a baby around for one day, just crawl whatever the baby was doing, and Jim Thorpe dropped out after half the day. He just couldn't keep up with the baby. And of course, all children have challenges, right, whether it's babies, school age, adolescents, what do they say? Little kids, little challenges, big kids, big challenges. Right. The challenges keep on going. Sometimes they're less physical, more psychological, but they're always going to be there. Number one, you have to have a sense of humor. Number two, husband and wife need to have time out with each other. They have to have what is called date nights, as it's sometimes called, or they have to recognize that you need time away from the kids. Babysitters, whatever it is. If you have family members, that's the best. Many people do not have family members, but You have to pay for a babysitter. Go ahead and do it. You need to be a husband and a wife in order to be a mother and a father. You need that relationship. Number 3, just know, and I can tell you this because I've been through this, that you're going to look back at this time as the best part of your life. Now it's so hard, it's so difficult, but you're going to miss it. You are going to miss it. And therefore, if you're going to miss it, try to get the joy out of it as it's going on. Because there is nothing as important you will ever do in your life as raising these children. You could be a great rabbi, you could be a great politician, you could be on the Supreme Court. In fact, I'm actually paraphrasing the most recent justice on the Supreme Court, Amy Coney Barrett, who is a mother of 7, and she herself said, with all of her accomplishments, a young woman reaching the highest court in the United States, one of the most important courts, maybe the most important court in the world. And she said that there was no accomplishment in her life that is as important as raising her 7 children. And although she's a Catholic, I am perfectly free to plagiarize that statement and say that it equally applies to Judaism. So I think with sense of humor, making time for themselves, physical exercise is very important, because that kind of gives you the energy that you need, taking care of yourself, and just realizing how wonderful this is, how you're going to miss it. And it's really the most important thing. Now, the other thing is, a very good piece of advice in raising children generally is don't make a big deal about anything that's not going to matter in 20 years. By that I mean the following. Let me give you 2 examples. If I have a child that is cruel, that is mean, that is selfish, that steals, I got to take care of that, because those are habits that could, become permanent habits. But if a child runs around, or a child is a little bit wild, or a child can't sit at the table, I don't necessarily have to fight every battle. I don't necessarily have to intervene in everything, because 20 years from now, he's probably not going to be dancing on the table. Meaning, the things that kids do because they're kids, and they're likely to get out of it when they become adults, so let them do it. What's the difference? Focus on the type of adult you want your child to be, and that's how you determine your interventions. So when it comes to midot, that's very, very important. The bad midot of a child can become the bad midot of an adult. But things that kids do because they're kids, let them have their childhood. Right? So we don't have to be so super vigilant in which we're policing every aspect of what our children are doing.
That's wonderful. Thank you. Rabbi, thank you so much for your time here. I have a friend who, when he talks about people, what he says about them is, if he speaks favorably, he says he's doing wonderful things for our people. A friend, Harold wrote, I would just want to quote him as saying that, I want to say you too, Rabbi Poston behind the camera, Rabbi Breitowitz, you just do such wonderful things for our people. Thank you so much for taking the time today.
Thanks so much. Thank you.
Shama shir shir chadash